I wonder if you ever looked around and thought, nothing terrible happened to me in my childhood. So why do I struggle with relationships, put everyone first, or find it hard to know what I need? And the answer could partly lie in something that's called emotional neglect. Now, this is often misunderstood, and people think of childhood difficulties as things that happen to us. And heaven knows we read some terrible things and hear terrible things about children who've been through appalling experiences. But emotional neglect is more subtle than that, and it's often more about what didn't happen than what did happen. It happens when a child's emotional world isn't noticed, understood, responded to, or valued consistently. And this doesn't necessarily mean that parents were bad people. Many parents were doing the best they could with what they knew and the resources they had, and responding from their own upbringing, their own experiences that they had, how they were taught to deal with their emotions or not. But if emotions weren't talked about and feelings were dismissed, if achievement mattered more than emotional well-being, or if there simply wasn't enough emotional availability, the child learns something important. They learn that their feelings don't really matter. And that lesson, sadly, does not stay in childhood. It follows them into adulthood. And I see this regularly in my work. Many people have experienced this emotional neglect and don't realize it. And they just tell me things like, I don't know what I feel. I always put other people first. I struggle to ask for help, and I feel so guilty when I say no. And I have spent my whole life trying to keep everyone else happy. And on the surface, these look like personality traits, but underneath they are adaptations, strategies that help the child fit into his or her environment when they were young. And if your emotional needs weren't consistently met, you may have learned to stop expressing them. And if your feelings weren't acknowledged, you may have learned to disconnect from them. And if you receive praise for being easy, helpful, independent, and strong, you may have learned that your value came from meeting other people's needs rather than recognizing your own. Sounds familiar to those of us that were brought up in the, well, until my age. Um, I think it's looking at the way my children parent their children, I think it's changing. But the hidden cost of this is that you can become very good at taking care of everyone else while losing touch with yourself. You become the reliable one, the strong one, and the one that everyone turns to. But underneath, there is exhaustion, resentment, anxiety, self doubt, or the feeling that something's missing. And that's when people come and tell me that they feel stuck. Not because they don't know how to function, quite the opposite. Very often they're very intelligent and capable. They've had good careers, raised their families, supported others, but they don't feel connected to themselves. And that's often the part that this emotional neglect leaves behind. So let me give you a couple of examples. A man in his 40s came to see me because of his relationship with his teenage son, and it wasn't going so well. And when I asked about his childhood, he immediately told me he had a great upbringing. There was no major abuse, no trauma, and he spoke warmly about his family. But as we explored things more deeply, he began to remember how dismissive his father had been whenever he expressed fears or worries. If he was upset, he was told not to be silly, and if he was frightened, he was told to toughen up. And of course, boys don't cry. The message wasn't intentional, and over time, he learned, though, that difficult feelings were not welcome. So as an adult, he found it hard to connect emotionally with his own son because nobody had ever shown him how to connect with those parts of himself. And as he became more comfortable recognizing and expressing his needs and his own emotions, he found it easier to respond differently to his son and create a much closer relationship. And another client in her 50s came to see me because she struggled to maintain close friendships or any long-term romantic relationships. And again, she described her childhood as happy. And she told me how she loved going to boarding school when she was 13. But as we explored those experiences, she began to recognize that being away from home, she had been required to become very self-sufficient emotionally. She learned not to need much, not to rely too much on others, and definitely not to expect emotional support. And those adaptations helped her cope at the time, and she did have a great time at school, no doubt. She loved it. But later in life, they made intimacy and emotional closeness much more difficult. And again, as we worked and she became more aware of these old protective patterns, she found herself more open to connection and less likely to just pull away when relationships became emotionally important. Neither of these clients would have described themselves as emotionally neglected when they first came to see me. And it seems a very strong thing to say, but yet they had both learned in different ways to disconnect from important emotional needs. And that's why emotional neglect is so difficult to spot. It's often hidden inside the coping strategies that once helped us get through childhood. And the good news is that this isn't permanent. Your brain and nervous system are capable of change, but awareness is often the first step. When you begin to recognize that these patterns develop for a reason, something shifts. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? You start asking, what happened that led me to adapt in this way? And that's a very different question because it opens the door to compassion and understanding. And from there, you can begin to build a relationship that's very different with yourself and start to learn to notice your feelings, recognize your needs, be comfortable saying no without feeling selfish. And above all, know that your worth is not dependent on how useful you are out there. It does come from within. And perhaps for the first time, you can start making decisions based on what you genuinely want, what you've learned, than rather what you've learned to expect of yourself or what you think other people expect from you. And many of my clients tell me they feel calmer, more confident, more connected to who they are. And this is the work I help people do, not endlessly analysing the past, but understanding how the past may still be influencing the present. Because once you do understand the pattern, you have choices, and choice creates change. If any of this sounds or feels or looks familiar, I'd invite you to spend a few moments just reflecting on the question, what did I learn about my feelings when I was growing up? And the answer can be surprisingly revealing. And you've recognized yourself in some of these patterns. You don't have to figure it out alone. I help people understand the patterns that keep them stuck so they can move forward with more confidence, calm, and choice. Your past may explain your patterns. It does not have to define your future.